Camp drafting is? Yeah, well, a Clarence Purvis Smith started camp drafting in Tenterfield. He got the rules up and going, and it was the first competitive camp draft to be held in Australia. And Tenterfield just celebrated their 140th anniversary.
Wow.
So it's been going every year since then. It hasn't missed a year. Yeah. So that's what my starting point. Benjo Patterson, he had a connection to Tenterfield. He married a girl from Tenterfield Station. Her father was the manager of Tenterfield Station. And they were married in a little Presbyterian church next street across St Stephen's Presbyterian Church. It's still a church today. I believe Mr Walker put some money towards building the church for the wedding. I think that was an old English custom, if people could afford it, yeah. So, and they were married there. Supposedly he proposed to her at the viewing platform out at the Bundaberg Falls. There's two national parks, Bald Rock and Bundaberg Falls, just northeast probably of Tenterfield. And at the viewing platform there, he supposedly proposed to her. The Matilda, in the Waltzing Matilda song, she claims that it was her name that was used in the song, that Benjo promised her he would put her name in a song. Benjo Patterson used to go through here before he was with Alice Walker, but he used to go through on his way up to Winton. And wherever he stayed, if he was staying somewhere, he would, if there was a party on, he'd like to go to the party. And he'd play the piano. So this one particular afternoon, he was at a party in Tenterfield, and a mum and her little girl came in. The little girl was dressed up really nicely, and by the end of the afternoon, she was sitting on his knee playing the piano with him and singing along. And he found out her name was Matilda, and he said, "I promise you I will use your name in a song one day." Whether he had already started the song or whether he wrote it after it, I don't know. But at any rate, he went on his way up to Winton. The song was written, or the verse, and when he got to Winton, he stayed with the McPherson family out at Dagworth Station, and he had 2 or 3 daughters, and one of the times while he was there, this daughter was playing this catchy little tune on a ziffer, and he thought, oh, that's not a bad little tune. Then, hang on a minute, I think it might match the words. I think I can combine them. So at any rate, he and the McPherson daughter got together and they worked on it and got it going, and it was sang for the first time in Winton at the Gregory North Hotel. I'm not real sure what the year was, but this Matilda, well, she was a Tenterfield girl. She grew up and she married a Gordon Moore from Tenterfield, and they lived just out at the base of Mount Mackenzie, which is the mountain in behind here. There is a Mount Mackenzie road that you can take and go out to the lookout. If you could see a little old falling down home on your left-hand side before you go across quite a quick steep crossing, that was where Matilda and her husband lived and reared their family. If you just go across the crossing and a couple of 100 metres further on your left-hand side, there's another fairly old home in disrepair as well, but it was where Major Thomas from the Breaker Morant and the Boer War, that's where he lived. And he was a solicitor here, and he owned, well, I think he got the Tenterfield Star, our local paper, up and running. Yeah, so that was where he lived. Later on in his life, he became quite a recluse, and he ended up with a little hut out in the Bundaberg area, and that is where he died. He sort of didn't like to mix with people or anything like that. He became quite a hermit. He's buried up in the Tenterfield Cemetery. Yeah. Thunderbolt, he was our bushranger. There's a Thunderbolt's hideout just north of Tenterfield, one of his hideouts where he used to hide his horses and that. It's a fairly rough track, not rough, but it's a bush track to where it is. But it's quite a nice, it's a lovely playground for young kids. Yeah. So yeah, Henry Parkes, he gave the first National Federation speech in Tenterfield down at the School of Arts on the next corner. He got off the train, he came down by coach, I think, down to the hotel. There was the Exchange Hotel, it was on the opposite side corner to the post office. and he had a few toddies there and practiced the speech, I think, and then he went diagonally across the street to where the School of Arts was, and that's where he done his first speech for the nation of Australia. Yeah. And then we've got Peter Allen. He was born here. I can go through the song if you would like. It's entirely up to you. Would you like me to?
Yeah.
I'll just go through the words. This is George Woolnough. He was the saddler, the grandfather of Peter Allen. He was here for 52 years. He then sold to Ted Daly, who was probably here 30 plus years, and Trevor Gibson was the next one to be here, and he was the last saddler to work here as a saddler. So I'll start the song. The first verse is mainly about George. The second verse is about Peter and his life growing up in Australia, and the third verse is mainly about Peter looking back on what's happened and putting it all behind him and going forward. Yeah, that's the way I look at it. You may look differently. But anyway, the late George Woolnough, he worked on High Street, which is the next street across, and he lived on Menace, which is the next cross street, number 30 Menace Street, going up towards the railway station. For 52 years, he sat on his veranda. If you look behind you there, there's a sketch of him sitting out here on this veranda, and he made his saddles. And if you ask questions about sheep or ploughs or dogs, you just ask the saddler who lived without sin. They're building a library for him. So in that verse there, he lived without sin. He was a member of the Masonic Lodge. He also used to run a boys' youth club here for many years. He was a very good community-minded person. The town library down here has got, it's on part of the School of Arts on the next corner down. There's a section of it named the George Woolnough area, which is still named today, and that was in recognition of what he did for the community over the years. And it says here, sheep, ploughs and dogs. Well, it was birds, ploughs and dogs. He used to breed his own poultry and show it at different shows, and he used to judge at a lot of the shows in northern New South Wales. And he also bred the little Tenterfield Terrier dog a long time before it was a registered breed. Yeah, so he was a busy man. So then we're into the chorus. Time is a traveller, Tenterfield saddler, turn your head. Right again, Jackaroo, think I see kangaroo up ahead. So the next verse is, the son of George Woolnough went off and got married and had a war baby. But something was wrong, and it's easier to drink than go crazy. And if there are questions about why the end was so sad, well, George has no answers about why a son ever has need of a gun. So in that little verse there, Peter was born in Tenterfield. His mother came up from Armidale, her family were down there. She had the baby, Peter, in the Tenterfield Hospital. When he was about 6 weeks old, they went back home again. When he was born, his father was away at the war. His father had a drinking problem, but it was much worse when he came home from the war. Peter did most of his schooling in Armidale. There was a lady there that taught him tap dancing. She also had a big influence with his piano playing. She used to play at one of the local hotels of an evening and a Saturday. And on a Saturday afternoon, you'd see Peter knocking on the ladies' lounge and saying, "Can I have a go?" on the window. And when she wanted a break, she'd pop the window up and Peter would come in and he'd play the piano and he'd sing and he'd dance. And if there was anyone within hearing of this young fellow, they would all come and watch him because he was just so talented. And he was only 10 years of age at that stage. Everything was done by ear. I have read somewhere where if there was a movie on that had, like a musical movie that had lots of music in it or anything, he'd skip school on a Friday afternoon to go to the film and see with all the music, and then he'd go home and he'd sit down and he'd play all the tunes he'd heard on the piano. He was just so talented, yeah. So when his dad came home from the war, he moved to Armidale to live with the family, and he got himself work down there. And one day his father borrowed a gun from someone he knew, and he went home and he shot their pet dog, and then he took his own life. And Peter and his mum, and Peter had a younger sister, Lynn, they sort of had to cope with that happening. and they got a fair bit of negative feedback from the community about everything that had happened, and as a result of all that, they decided they'd move to Lismore to have a fresh start. I don't know whether Peter went back to school in Lismore, but I think he mainly concentrated on his music, and he used to go to the Gold Coast from time to time just to see what the music scene was. And on one of these trips up there, he met a young fellow by the name of Chris Bell. And these two boys were both musical, they could both sing, so they decided they'd get together and make a bit of pocket money and play at different venues and fetes and whatever they could find. And Chris Bell's dad took these two boys on and decided that he'd take them to wherever they needed to go to play for their concerts and that sort of thing, and keep them on the straight and narrow, I think. And one day he thought, I might give Bandstand a ring and just see what they think I can do with these two young kids. So they went to this little place and they rang them, and of course Bandstand said send them down, and he said no, I don't want to do that yet. He said I think they're too young. He said I just want to know what I can do to help them. And he wrote, the fellow at Bandstand said, well, the first thing you can do is give them a name. Have they got a name? And he said, no, they're just two bush kids. And he said, well, the first thing you've got to do is give them a name. So anyway, when he got off the phone and he looked around the little room where they were in to phone up, and there was a suitcase there. And on one end it had it made by the Allen Brothers. He thought, oh, that doesn't sound too bad. So he must have ran it past the boys, and they must have agreed, because from then on they performed as the Allen Brothers. So it was as simple as that. One was Chris Bell, one was Peter Woolnough, and they became the Allen Brothers. Yeah. So the grandson of George has been all around the world, and he lives no special place. He changed his last name and he married a girl with an interesting face. There's Liza Minnelli up there. They were together in their marriage for about 3 years. They divorced after about 6 years, but I think they remained fairly close chums throughout his life. Yeah. We'd almost forgotten them both, because in the life he leads, there's nowhere for George and his library or son with his gun to belong, except in this song, and then it just goes on for different verses. Yes, so that's mainly the words behind, the meaning behind the words. Yeah.
Beautiful, lovely.
So I hope I haven't bored you too much.
No.
And just feel free to look around and take photos.